Welcome to Customer Driven with Chad McDaniel. Well known throughout the customer leadership industry, Chad has been the chief community leader for Execs in the Know, one of the top executive customer advocacy groups on the planet. With a passion for customer success and a desire to share and develop best practices, Chad's conversations with industry leaders aim to give unfiltered, unplugged access to industry peers who are customer obsessed, just like you. If you enjoy the show, please be sure to rate and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Now here's your host, Chad McDaniel.
Well, I want to say thank you to all of our listeners for another episode of Customer Driven with Chad McDaniel. And as we're approaching the holidays here, just a quick shout out to the listeners. I want to welcome or wish each and every one of you a great upcoming holiday season. I hope everyone's doing well. And I'm personally excited for 2019 right around the corner here. So I'm looking forward to working with a lot of you as we head into 2019. But 2018 has been a phenomenal year. And I really just want to congratulate a lot of the brands out there that have continued to have such measurable success within their customer support operations and the continued push for that customer success, reducing customer effort, better tracking customer sentiment and predictions, and the tools and the analytics and just everything you're doing to make customer first within your organization. For our listeners, if you're not familiar with Execs in the Know, I encourage you to get involved. I mean, my goodness, we've got a tremendous large group of corporate brands that really just want to help pay the industry forward, sharing ideas, best practices, insights, everything around customer success. You can find out a lot more about us at execsintheknow.com. If you go to the resources tab, there is a full outline of everything you can find about us, our events, the things we're doing, and how to get involved with us. And by the way, if you enjoy today's episode, I would strongly encourage you to help me out. Please rate, write a comment, and subscribe to Customer Driven podcast series with myself. I greatly appreciate that support and your advocacy. So, with that, we've got a guest that I am just really pleased that I was able to secure some of his time based on his insane schedule and busyness in the industry. He's a dynamic leader, and I'm going to introduce here very shortly Robert Sutton. He is the Senior Vice President of Customer Care at Vonage. For you that may not know Rob has been an absolute advocate and passionate leader in our industry for a number of years. If you want to find out more about his background and his success, you can go to his LinkedIn profile. Just look up Robert Sutton, and that's Sutton. You can definitely see him and find out a little bit more about his background. So with that, Robert, I just want to do a quick check, make sure you're there, and let's get started. So first of all, thank you for making some time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chad, and thank you for inviting me today.
Well, it's a real pleasure. And, we do a pretty strong vetting job, Robert, of who we'd like to bring into the show, not only their experiences and successes, but really willing to share some ideas, some concepts, what worked. I love to hear about failures too. And I think that's where we learn is through some of the failures that maybe that we've learned and tried and tested throughout. So today's episode really was the positioning was the what's on the mind of the customer service professional today. So here we are, basically December 2018. We're getting ready to head very quickly into 2019, Rob, and it's hard to believe how fast this last year went. It's amazing. But you and I were brainstorming a little bit before we did this episode, and you were one of the first people I wanted to reach out to say, Rob, I need your help because I trust and value your expertise and what's kind of on our mind. And I think there were three areas that we sort of centered on. And those three areas were technology, talent, and improving CX and loyalty. So we're going to dive into this today for our listeners. And again, my guest is Rob Sutton, Senior Vice President of Vonage. So Robert, I'm going to turn over to you. You're the expert. Technology can mean so many different things. And through everything I have been doing in, let's say, the last year or two, this continues to come up. But I think we first of all probably should define what we mean by technology. What is the challenge? What's the struggle? And then what we're doing to kind of approach it and tackle it, if that makes sense. So I'm going to turn it to you.
You are absolutely correct, Chad. Technology is and should be on the top of mind for every customer experience leader in the industry. Technology to me is those modules, those software packages that can enable a great end-to-end customer experience. And there are many of them. And we shouldn't limit ourselves. There's clearly buzzwords today in the industry: AI, chatbots, guided assist. But we can't forget about cloud-based solutions for call center technology, CRM technology, knowledge management, data warehousing, analytics. It's no wonder that professionals like you, myself, and your listeners could easily get overwhelmed with this topic. Uh, One thing that is on top of my mind is, first, where to start. But more importantly, once you purchase these technologies, you have to be cognizant that they all have to interact not only with one another, but with your internal systems that might maybe proprietary or developed or customized third party solutions. What I've experienced, Chad, and for your listeners in the technology space is that these technology decisions, while pro- support professionals, CX leaders drive the business decisions behind these technologies, in reality, in my experience, current and in past, these are fragmented decisions across multiple organizations. It is important for me and customer experience professionals to have strong partnerships with key decision makers, specifically IT organizations, when going forth and implementing these technologies. Uh, we have to bring our IT partners along proactively rather than reactively to set the foundation up for success. And even in the evaluation process, typically, whether it is an AI solution, guided assist for customer portals, SaaS based solution for call center technology, it is important to have key partners at the table with these vendors to help vet the technology and also the companies through this process. I have seen some failures. Certainly, we all success can also be defined in failing and failing fast. Uh, but if you bring and communicate along the entire organization around the technology roadmap, you will see fewer bumps in the road when implementing these technologies.
And I was going to say, thank you, Rob, for setting that stage. And again, not only the plethora of technology channels and stuff that you alluded to in the beginning, but maybe the lack of architecture, maybe siloed software purchases that are taking place, the next shiny object. One of the things I have continued to say is that, and I want to ask you also about your channel support today, just so our listeners understand that. But know your customer. At the end of the day, you don't necessarily have to support every single channel if it doesn't make sense to your organization. I'm not saying I'm not a fan of multi-channel and channel support of preference to the consumer, but we can't put an aggregate of all types of companies in the same bucket. It really is know your consumer, know your customer, and their channels of desire and preference. But Rob, to that comment, how are your thoughts, or in regards to the listeners, approaching some of those challenges? We may come from very legacy-based architect designs or a culture that doesn't support this, but how is we as service leaders got to keep pushing the envelope to get to what's ultimately needed for our consumers?
Yeah, and Chad, that's a great question. And I think there's a few questions within the question. So first, when you're dealing with technology, it is important to start with the end in mind. As I've mentioned previously, there is a lot of technology out there to purchase to help the customer experience, and those purchasing decisions could be fragmented. But if you have a roadmap, sit down with engineers, your internal partners, and develop a technology roadmap that maps to a desired customer experience. It'll typically lead you to the right decisions and the right activities in step function to transform legacy operations, premise-based equipment going to the cloud, um, new modules and technologies being implemented to augment support sites. You will go step function and improve your customer experience. But it's important, it's not a siloed operation. It has to be a collaborative approach internally with key to stakeholders and decision makers across many functions. And that's where I see a lot of work being done. Now, having said that, there's an old adage, test and fail fast and learn. And it's important that nimble, agile organizations also test some of these technologies to see how it may or even may not work for their organization. And failing fast is important because it tells you not only what not to do, but it also allows you to take a step back and evaluate if is there a better course of action either with the technology or a slightly different process it could map to.
I was just going to say I've heard that across the board, and I subscribe 200% to what that is and what you just said. We have, as service leaders, such an opportunity to control these tests and to learn from them and learn quickly. But there's no excuse to why we are not or we should delay. Those options and availability are afforded to us. But I want to wrap up a little bit on the technology because I know we've got a few more topics, but I want to ask Rob, as far as our listeners go, um, any suggestions, any advice, any thoughts about? I know we've talked a little bit about it here, but as we continue to look at the technology equation, because it's not going to change, it's not going to necessarily go away. But what would be your advice?
Yeah, and let me start by providing some background where my current operations is and what channels of support we offer. Certainly, we have traditional voice channels, email, web to case channels. We have support portals, online support presence, chat, and also the introduction of chat bots, specifically AI, on our website. And in addition to that, communities that we could probably talk about here shortly. What I would encourage your listeners to do is understand their customer and their customer needs. And specifically, I look at it in personas. What type of people are you supporting? Are they technologically savvy? They have little to no time. They're already product experts because they all will probably desire to be supported in different ways. So you cannot have a one size fit all strategy, but understand where your most important gaps are. Gaps being defined as areas where you're not meeting the need of a large portion of your customers, and start there. And it might be communities because you need some level of online presence of customers helping customers, or it might be chat. People want to multitask while at work, while getting answers, whether you're into B2C or supporting B2B companies, or maybe even IVR technologies, while been around for a while, could help could help your companies deliver a great end-to-end experience.
And I'm so glad that this is recorded so our listeners can go back and hopefully taking some feverish notes as you were sharing some ideas and concepts to the technology equation, Rob. Again, we through in 2018 Execs in the Know, I think we ran 5 select cities, what we called our next generation technologies AI automation briefings, and I had a chance to meet so many great leaders in the field in that series. And I really want to replicate what I heard consistently was very, very similar to what you just outlined and in your advice and your thoughts there. And Rob, I also appreciate you kind of outlining the channel support mechanisms at your current organization. Please keep us in touch about how the continued automation is going, what you guys are seeing, observations, because that is front and center for a good majority of all of our people in the community. So moving away from technology, and again, I know we could have a complete show about just technology, but I think this is a big one. And I'm going to really make this a center point of my focus in 2019 is the talent equation, because that is front and center and huge in so many different ways. Listeners, you have to agree because you're dealing with it too. So when we think about how to develop the next generation of leaders, where are they going to come from, the skills needed, the ever-changing skills, and maybe tools and technologies that the front line is faced with. Rob, first of all, when we're thinking talent, what's on your mind? What are you doing and approaching thinking? What are you concerned about right now with talent?
Chad, there's a few areas that concerns me with talent. As everyone is aware, the economy has been good in the United States, and there are tight labor markets around the country, specifically where I operate in and where I have operated in. And so finding and retaining talent is very important. It sounds cliche, simple blocking and tackling, but I'm amazed at how little focus some organizations put on this effort. Um, the other area is great. You found the talent, you hired them. Now, how do you develop them? Uh, Products are getting more complex, not less. Technology is becoming part of many more products than it was years ago, especially in the overall product life cycle. We need to continue to evaluate who we are recruiting, and once employed, how are we developing their skill sets to evolve as our products grow and evolve. Unfortunately, I see more complexity coming down the road and not less. And with that, we constantly have to look at job descriptions and the skill set required to perform tasks or new tasks to support the products along the customer experience continuum.
Rob, I had asked you, and again, I'm not looking for you to agree, but it's really more your expertise. We have these what we call fixed work structures, talent pools through either internally or outsourced or however it's being approached. But there's this whole concept of, as I was having a conversation a few episodes about, from fixed to fluid, and looking at gig economy, crowdsourcing to support. Again, I'm not saying that fits for everyone, but if we're going to have this dynamic issue continuing to take place, we've got to get creative to how we're going to address the talent challenges to support our operations and our consumers. So my question to you is, with some of those concepts I referenced, are you a fan? Are you a non-fan? Do you subscribe, not subscribe? What are your thoughts with that?
I will say I'm a developing fan. So, in my past roles, dating back as early 2000s, I have implemented customer forums, communities that we call them today. And it's about customers helping customers in a free model. Who are the best advocates of your service? Happy customers. More importantly, who do customers trust more? Other customers versus maybe the company itself. So I'm a big fan of starting simple with communities. And then how to evolve from there, I think, depends on the industry, your products, and any regulatory requirements within your industry may be an impediment or a bump in the road to accomplishing some of that. But I'm looking into this now. and I'm just learning about it. So I'm in the camp of developing fan. I don't think it's a question of if, it's a question of when, and the when might be specific to what industry you sit in.
I agree with the not a question of if, when, and any of our listeners that are approaching that type of support model through crowdsourcing or other bases like that. I'd love to hear from you and understand your thoughts there. Rob, do you guys ever leverage into the at-home agent opportunities, or has it been within the brick and mortars?
I have used work at home in a disaster recovery mode. Um, I traditionally had brick and mortar, and I've used outsourced partners that have work at home operations.
So we have these agents that are becoming super agents or need to become super agents, and obviously we need to have the knowledge management tools and other systems to effectively support them. Again, I call it ease of agent use or ease of agent completion. So you know how are we tackling those type of things too? So we could hire the best agents, but again, if we have complex transaction support through multiple channels, how are you thinking of that and supporting those?
That is a fantastic question. I would start by saying it all starts with tools and processes layered with training over it. Certainly, an important strategy to the growing complexity, channel complexity, product complexity, is a solid knowledge management strategy that serves as a foundation for your learning and development operations on how you bring agents along very quickly in moments in time. I mean, let's face it, the models we used to employ was put someone in training for 2, 3 weeks, send them to the wolves, probably with a nesting period in between. The new model is bringing people along in shorter periods of time. Adult learning behavior states we probably retain 30, 40% of what we're taught. So constant reinforcement processes and technology could help there with 5 to 10 minute modules, 20 to 30 minute learning modules to help bring people along, not over the course of their first 3 weeks of employment, but for their first year of employment. And then we could get on to discuss how we career path our professionals through their expanded knowledge base within an organization.
Again, for our listeners, you've been hearing Rob Sutton, the Senior Vice President of Customer Care with Vonage. And Rob, I mean, you've had a great career over the span of time, not only with Vonage, but even in the past. I mean, I'm assuming the Vonage growth curve has been tremendous with your guys' customer success acquisitions and customer support. Um, uh, as we move from the talent piece, and I think it's not going to go away. It's just a matter of how we're going to continue to discuss it. I'm going to be definitely spearheading a lot of initiatives in 2019 towards the talent equation. Rob, I'd love to get you involved again to help me in some of that and keep an eye on some things for us. But the third piece was improving CX and loyalty. And this is a very common thing I hear a lot about: channel measurement, channel satisfaction, analytics, predictions, insights. I guess when we think improving CX and loyalty, maybe you were not thinking so much at the channel level, but you had a different idea in mind.
Well, I think before we get into that idea, one thing we have to acknowledge is regardless of industry, the table stakes for good service is increasing, and customers keep raising the bar on their expectations of what good service is. When I think back 20 years ago, and I had a goal of email response of 24 hours and thought it was great. Today, customers, depending on segment and product, might find that unacceptable, especially in certain customer segments I've been dealing with lately. So, what I would what I look for is constantly working with our marketing research departments, understanding our customers and what are the needs of our customers in terms of delivering specific to channels a good customer experience. taking a step back, the challenge that keeps me up at night, um, I'm bridging it with technology, is how to execute to have service as a differentiator for the products I support and the company I support. Um, and then Chad, that's what's keeping me up at night here.
Rob, I got bad news. You're not alone.
That's good. That's good. Well, then we'll have a lot of stories to share at your future sessions and roundtables. But but when I look at the customer experience, a lot of times the inclination will be to look within the processes you control. But it's important as leaders that we go upstream and downstream from our processes. A good example might be fulfillment. Typically, not a customer support uh, function, but it is the first thing a customer or one of the first interactions a customer may have with a company, including mine, when they open up the box. And what is that out of box experience like for that customer? I've been in situations where the out of box experience did not match the online experience, which did not match the voice experience. So, harnessing the organizations that touch a customer and looking at the customer experience holistically is very important, as people, and I don't blame them here, will typically take a siloed approach to optimize the process they're responsible for, not realizing the downstream impacts um, they could have on other organizations, whether it's billing, finance, due to poor bill expectation, or as the fulfillment example, increased contacts into channels, whether voice, chat, email, or however your customers are contacting you.
Again, um, that is well said, and I'm glad we've got this recorded. And going back to that number one thing keeping you up, service as a differentiator. Um, First of all, I'm very glad to hear that that is the center point of your guys' belief and your value of the customer, and looking at that on a continuous basis and not taking it for granted. And I think we as service leaders, we can never get too comfortable. I think we need to continue to push the envelope to, we may be having we feel great measurements and support structures and all this stuff. But again, we've got to be on the forefront of redefining change and success and looking at, that service as a differentiator. And I think, Rob, I'm hopeful that, our next gathering, our face-to-face gathering, our national summit's going to be in New Orleans, February 4th through the 6th in 2019. It's a 2-day powwow all about some of the things we've been talking about and then some. Robert, I'm hopeful that you personally can come down and join us in New Orleans amongst many of the peer groups as we kind of continue to battle these conversations and best practice sharing together for that. So again, that's going to be February 4th to 6th in New Orleans. Um, Rob, I know time always goes so fast, but how do you want to leave this episode? What are the you've been a great guest, thank you. What do you want to leave us or challenge us with, or give us some visionary here? I always like to kind of leave on a very inspiring note in thought process, just because people like you that sit in the chair at your level doing what you do, it's a very, very tough world. Sometimes it can get very challenging, but I think we've got a tremendous opportunity to the roles that we sit and position in the industry. And I think we as leaders, need to be very proud of the type of industry we represent.
Yeah, and that is a very thought-provoking question. What I would tell people, and it's an appropriate time of year, uh, I would imagine organizations are just wrapping up budgets. 2019 planning is near or should be complete. Activities, key projects are understood. And let's face it, there's no less than 20 to 40 needs that any organization needs. What I would tell people is understand what are the three most important things to them and their organization, and more importantly, their customers, and execute flawlessly on it. And that might be the introduction of a new channel, chatbots, or technology, albeit that they're looking to implement to enhance the customer experience. Focus on your talent. People are the most important asset that we as an organization and leaders have. And in this market, the cost of backfilling an employee is much greater than the cost of retaining one. So, Chad, to boil it down simply, prioritize and execute, and then retain your talent.
Well, you've been listening to Robert Sutton, Senior Vice President, Customer Care at Vonage, and that is now going to conclude our episode. But I do want to leave our listeners with a couple of quick thoughts. First of all, please, if you've enjoyed today's episode, I really would appreciate your help if you could rate, leave some comments, and also subscribe to the podcast series on iTunes and Stitcher and all the major platforms that we support. It really is people like Rob and others that make up the execs in the know community. I have been running the community for the last 10 years, and my vision was to really embrace the success of our leaders out there like Rob and showcase them in so many different ways, because I know the hard work that goes on a persistent and continuous basis. If you've got a great story or a story of learning success, even failures, I'd love to hear from you, because this is how we all benefit, is hearing from Rob and others like Rob for the Customer Driven podcast series. So on behalf of myself, Chad McDaniel, Rob, thank you so much for being a guest on today's episode, and have a great remainder of the year.
Thank you, Chad, and Happy New Year and happy holidays to all your listeners.
Thank you for listening to Customer Driven with Chad McDaniel. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to rate and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. It really makes a difference in helping others find the podcast. For more information on our customer experience community, please visit execsintheknow.com.